Hey guys, today we're going to learn about some slave rebellions and uprisings, how people are trying to resist against the institution of slavery. We're going to be looking at two rebellions and historical figures with Nat Turner and John Brown to help us kind of understand how slavery is becoming more and more tense and causing more and more conflicts leading up to the Civil War. So by the end of class, we're going to kind of answer this question about how should we look at rebellions and revolts, and should we look at these historical figures, Nat Turner and John Brown, as heroes or as villains. So we're going to take some notes. We're going to analyze some documents. You can pause this video at any time in order to catch up on the notes, replay it, get the information down into your notes so you've got it for the future. So go ahead and label your notes slave rebellions. Two terms I want you to get are abolition and rebellion. So I'm using this term abolition a lot lately, and I want to make sure we know what it means. Abolition is the actions to end something, to stop something from existing. Abolition at this time is referring to slavery, taking steps to end slavery in the United States. In rebellion, we should know this, but if not, make sure you get it down. It's open resistance towards a government or a system that's typically going to be using violence. So there's a lot of different ways people were fighting against slavery. We've talked about it a lot, that this institution is going to have a lot of pain, trauma, a terrible point in human history, but there's going to be a lot of physical, emotional, and psychological chains restricting people to slavery. So you don't have a lot of uprisings. Abolitionists are going to start to organize more and more to attempt to officially end slavery. There's going to be organizations to buy and free slaves. There's going to be a lot of propaganda, texts, brochures, books written to help spread media information so the public knows about the conditions of slavery, so more and more people will become anti-slavery. And then you have the system of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a way for abolitionists to support escaped slaves. So slaves who would leave their plantation, their masters, would run to all these safe houses, and they'd get supplies, food, clothing, sometimes transport with wagons from one house to the next until they can make it up into the free states in the North. You're also going to have protests within the plantations in the farming communities themselves. Many slave protests and resistances are going to be peaceful. Peaceful protests take more time, and you don't always see their effect as you would like the larger grandiose rebellions. But protests that slaves would enact would be running away, slowing down their work so that they have less production. Less productions means lower profits, making mistakes where machinery gets broken, or you can have mistakes where you're injuring yourself. So a slave who might be sold at auction in the future might cause like damage to themselves. That way they would lower the profit their master would get once they're sold at auction. And there was a lot of protests of learning to read or write. It was illegal for a slave to know how to read or write. So learning to read and write in itself was a form of rebellion. So they could write messages to abolitionists, help spread the word about the Underground Railroad, and just kind of have ways to be subversive through like back channels. You're also going to have a few organized slave rebellions. This image is one from Nat Turner. It's from a movie recently in 2016 about the slave rebellion of Nat Turner, one of the people we're talking about today. So there are more than these two rebellions, but they're going to be the ones we focus on today, and they're more prevalent in the antebellum era. So Nat Turner is going to be a slave. In 1831, he is going to organize and lead a slave rebellion, rising up against his master and plantation owner. and some of the surrounding plantation owners as well. The rebellion is going to end up killing 55 people, but ultimately he is going to get caught and put on trial and executed for his crimes. And then we have an anti-slavery white man in Kansas, John Brown, in 1858. He's going to have his own protests and violent protests against slavery. And then 1859, he's going to try to create a slave rebellion to try to prevent slavery spreading into the western state of Kansas Territory. So I'm going to give a little background, more specifically for John Brown than Nat Turner right now. Nat Turner is protesting against the institution of slavery. John Brown is going to be protesting more against this legal policy that is spreading into the territory of Kansas. So I'm going to back up and explain a little bit of what his protest is about. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to have this thing called popular sovereignty. People are arguing about whether slavery should spread into Western states as we work with Western expansion. So the solution is going to be the states will decide for themselves. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is saying that the people in Kansas can vote whether they want to have slavery or not. Whatever the people vote is what will happen. You're going to have this group called the Border Ruffians kind of pour in from Missouri. Missouri is a slave state. They want to get as many other slave territories and states as possible. So there are going to be 1,700 men who pour in to Kansas, will temporarily move there. That way they can vote to make Kansas a slave territory. Not only are they going to be there to vote, they're also going to threaten and manipulate people who oppose slavery so that they can try to manipulate more people to vote for slavery instead of against it, to try and turn Kansas into a slave state. You're going to have this term called Bleeding Kansas that you see when you look at this time period. And that's going to come from a few conflicts. The first is going to be Lawrence, Kansas. This is going to be the epicenter, or the city that is most anti-slavery in Kansas. They're going to help anti-slavery farmers settle, find land, get started. That way they can have more anti-slavery individuals there to help vote against slavery. But the surrounding area is going to create this idea that anti-slavery is treasonous against the United States ideals. So pro-slavery supporters, are going to pour into Kansas, and specifically into Lawrence. Their goal is to arrest those treasonous politicians who are saying slavery is wrong. They're going to pour in, kind of start ransacking the city, destroying the Capitol building, causing all the people in Lawrence to flood out of the city. That way they're not harmed while their city is kind of just burned down. You can kind of see that in this picture. Kansas is kind of representing the tensions that are growing across the nation. You have both sides getting up in arms, literally attacking one another, going and trying to arrest people of opposing viewpoints, burning down an entire city to try to show their discontent or their frustration with the other side. So Kansas is going to kind of have both sides starting to send more and more support. Enter John Brown. John Brown was upset. He was not okay with what happened in Lawrence. He is anti-slavery, and he is upset that no one stood up against the pro-slavery group. No one tried to defend their city or their stance of being anti-slavery. He is going to take matters into his own hands, and he is going to get a small group, and he is going to go to Pottawatomie Creek, and he is going to end up killing 5 border ruffians with a broadsword. He's going to execute them, leave their bodies as evidence of what he's done. And this starts a guerrilla warfare in Kansas, kind of a mini civil war before our actual civil war. By the end of 1856, you're having both sides fighting, literally turning to violence against each side, pro and anti-slavery. By the end of 1856, 200 people are dead, millions of dollars in property damage, and even the federal troops cannot help create order in Kansas. John Brown got away. No, like people knew he did it, but he managed to escape, so he's kind of out on the lam for a while. In 1859, he's going to return. He's going to go to Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and he's going to attempt to cause a slave rebellion, getting the surrounding slaves to rise up and take matters into their own hands. He's going to, with his sons and a few other anti-slavery individuals, he is going to take over a U.S. arsenal where there's a stockpile of weapons and ammunition. He's going to then send word to slaves to rise up. I have weapons for you. Let's fight for your freedom right here, right now. There's no response. No one comes to his call for to rise up. And the local militia is going to end up coming in, capturing him and his men. Things are torn across the nation once again. The North views this with admiration. They say, "Good job, John Brown. You are standing up for our beliefs, doing what is right, trying to help free the slaves." The South is outraged. People are dying at the hand of John Brown. There is no more law and order. There's anarchy where people are taking matters into their own hands, even though it's happening on both sides. So these two figures are incredibly controversial. Here we have images for Nat Brown. Here's kind of an anti-Nat Turner image, kind of showing, using words like horrid massacre in Virginia, showing his slave rebellion, murdering unarmed individuals of a plantation owner, woman, and children. But then here you have a more positive image, him kind of planning in the woods, kind of on the fringe, trying to fight for freedom. And here you have images of John Brown, kind of showing him in a positive light, having him look kind of like a savior. This is before his execution, after his trial, and he's found guilty. You have all these people kind of coming out in support of him, while you have probably a border ruffian looking down in disdain. But then you also have him looking like a madman, taking matters into his own hand, and how he's going to cause major conflicts between within the United States, starting a war, essentially. Today, what you're going to do is you're going to look at primary and secondary sources about these two figures. I think there's 3 on Nat Turner, and then you have some more on John Brown. As you look through these sources, I want you to answer the questions in your physical handout and also in the online Go formative spreadsheet. Ultimately, I want you to be able to answer this question. Should these historical figures be seen as heroes or as villains? Make sure to use the sources that you analyze today to help you answer that question.